Welcome to this Destination Staffordshire Best in Class Reputation webinar. This webinar is made up of 6 parts, and it would be hugely useful for you to watch each part of the Best in Class Reputation to help you build and understand the areas that we have already covered to get to this final part about negative feedback. So far we have covered clarifying what you're selling and to who, building marketing messages that manage expectation, building excellence in every part of your business, how to manage that excellence in all parts of your business, and understanding how to gain reviews and good feedback. So this last section then really is to talk about how to manage negative feedback. It is worth noting, and this is something we will cover again and again, that negative feedback often starts at the beginning of somebody's journey. So when we talk about managing negative feedback, start at the beginning. Bad feelings can start anywhere. Your relationship started early with your customers. If you think back to their very first Google searches for that weekend away or that event. And so it's important to understand at what point during that journey things began to feel a little bit negative. If you have covered the first parts of this particular webinar, you will have really dug deep into thinking about where the excellence lies in your business and how those tiny bits of excellence, those moments of magic in your business are managed on a day-to-day level, from everybody from the kitchen porter right through to the general manager and everything in between. And if you are a very small business where you don't employ anyone, or maybe there's just a couple of you, how to manage all those bits of excellence without staff. So it's really important to understand the customer journey and think about where things may go wrong. Understanding where festering happens. When I talk about festering, quite often there can be something in somebody's experience or in your business that's a small negative that's been overlooked, forgiven, moved on from. But quite often, if you look at review sites, or if you look at somebody else's review sites or yours, TripAdvisor, for example, you often see businesses that have had a series of great reviews, and then there'll be one that's slightly less good and mentions maybe something like the food was a little bit cold, but otherwise it was marvellous. And then you'll notice that sometimes those reviews start to become more negative afterwards because other people will mention something similar. This isn't about humans being grumpy, but about just being human, that people will tend to gather round other opinion. So if you're lucky enough to be creating best-in-class reputation for your business, then that positive feedback will also cluster, and you will notice that people will become ever more enthusiastic about what you do. But you might also notice that if there is a regular festering point in your business, or something where you know that perhaps you haven't got it quite right, that things aren't perfect. So at the point of handing out the food, or at the point where somebody is welcomed, or the way that somebody leaves your premises, then you might start to notice that that little negative point is now being brought up again and again. So it's really worth going through and understanding where people might have become disillusioned with your business. It's also important to notice that it isn't a complaint or a negative feedback isn't always about the here and now, and it isn't always about you. So it is about understanding that somebody may leave a negative feedback or negative review or make a complaint and say, this was wrong. But in fact, what really annoyed them, the thing that they haven't mentioned, the thing that has planted the seed of doubt and lack of trust in you may well have been planted a long time ago. And it's important that you're able to separate out where that happens. So, for example, you have had a customer into your business, they seem to have enjoyed it, they smiled, they left, they paid, it was okay. And then they leave a review on a site that says, yeah, it was great, but really this was a disgrace. This was disappointing. And you're thinking to yourself, really? But I know that particular thing, let's say it was a meal, I know that that meal was great. They said they enjoyed it. Everybody smiled. So why are they being grumpy now? And sometimes it's not about that here and now. Sometimes it can be about them. And sometimes it can be about something else that annoyed them before. They can't really remember where that bad feeling came from, but they're going to take it out on something like the meal. And so we might dismiss that piece of negative feedback and think, well, I know that meal was right. They're just idiots, or they're just, being grumpy. Never, never dismiss somebody's bad feeling or negativity. Trace back that particular customer journey. Is there something else that festered within and perhaps emerged later on as a complaint about something else? So it's really important to take time, step back, don't react immediately. We'll talk about this again. And don't feel the necessity to either ignore, defend, or offer freebies, but just take a deep breath and think about their particular journey. And actually, was it about something else that actually has festered away and led them to leave something a little bit more negative? And for those of you who have watched the previous sections to this webinar, we have talked about this repeatedly, that it's those little building blocks to the tower of reputation that you are looking to build. And it's sometimes just one tiny little building block that was taken away during the process, and that leads to an instability in the trust and the reputation at the end. If we think about a Jenga tower, that one brick that's missing at the bottom can be the downfall of the whole tower later on. So try to view somebody's customer journey in that way. If you get a bad online review, always sleep on it before you reply to, because we take it personally. We have put our love and our heart and soul into these businesses. And so if somebody doesn't feel great about it, it really hurts. And that's okay for it to hurt. It's good that you care, but it's important to sleep on it too. So when you then respond to negative feedback, as we have already talked about, sleeping on it is really important. Understanding the origins of negative feedback is also important. We all understand that we will occasionally get somebody who is just bad-tempered for the sake of being bad-tempered. We already know that somebody was difficult from the beginning and you felt that it was always going to be a difficult journey. In the case of those kinds of customers, and we've all had them, is to do a couple of things. First of all, to check in every step of the way to make sure that each part of their journey is being solved as you go. So if somebody is particularly picky or particularly difficult or quite stressed, it's also really good at that point to understand their point of view. Are they stressed about organising this particular event? Are they particularly stressed people who are looking to get a break from their work? The other thing to do is also to note that it's not about you, it's about them in that situation. This isn't about you being arrogant about your business, but it's having the empathy to understand. But if we get to the stage where you have received some negative feedback, you haven't managed to complete that tower with every building block, that there has been something along the way that was left amiss. Building blocks do disappear, but they can be put back depending on how you manage it. If you have managed a mistake, then you will unlikely get negative feedback. It's always about how you manage a mistake rather than the mistake itself. So if food has arrived cold, but you did ask at the time of the meal, are you sure everything's okay? And you have asked those questions, try and ask open questions. So rather than incurring is everything okay, then ask an open question like, how is your meal? How are you enjoying your meal? So that you can elicit a bigger response. Very easy, especially if we're British, to say, yeah, it's fine. when actually it's not very nice at all. So ask open questions along the way to try and mitigate those little mistakes. And then if you're able to quickly and easily rectify them, then you're unlikely to then get negative reviews or feedback. So remember those building blocks all the way through. So if we get that negative feedback, the first thing that we can do is acknowledge feelings. So if you get a face-to-face complaint or you have a review that you're thinking about, it's okay to acknowledge their feelings. It's okay to accept their feelings, even if you feel that they're unfounded. This isn't about accepting blame, and this isn't about groveling apologies. This is about saying, I am sorry you feel bad about your experience with us, because you are sorry. You're sorry because they've got the wrong end of the stick, or you're sorry because you genuinely didn't deliver excellence for their experience. But either way, you are sorry. And even if you think those feelings are wrong, you're sorry that they're feeling them. So it's really important to start with I'm sorry you are feeling as badly as you are about this particular feeling. I would say at this point that saying sorry for the event itself needs to be thought about. You don't want to necessarily accept blame, but you do want to be as apologetic and as quickly as possible if you can. The next part of responding to negative feedback, so in the case of face-to-face negative feedback, it's important to acknowledge those feelings straight away, but also stick to a process that you have in your mind. Quite often, if we're faced with face-to-face negative feedback, it can put us on the back foot. Most of us don't like confrontation. Most of us feel upset and feel things personally about our businesses. So in that moment, it can be hugely difficult to manage things professionally. So it's worth, before any situation gets to such a negative situation, that you have a process written down. Have a process of managing a complaint. So if you have front of house staff who aren't senior members of staff, then you need to give them the empowerment and the power to make decisions and to follow a particular process, in order that at that moment they're on the back foot, they are able to manage it. So whether it's bullet points underneath the desk, bullet points that you ask them to practice and manage, either way, it's really important that they know where to go when faced with an angry or an upset customer. So that process might include acknowledging feelings. It might include asking them to have eye contact and to have open body language and not to cross their arms. It might include taking the customers to one side and saying, let's talk about this over here. The process might include listening carefully. You might advise your members of staff to listen carefully to what's being said and to ask people to repeat things if they're not sure and write them down. It's really useful when somebody is complaining face-to-face to do this, because often somebody starts with saying, well, I didn't like my meal last night, and they start to build because they're wound up, they're cross, they're feeling upset, and they might start to pile one on top of the other. During this process, it's really, really important to clarify and reflect back to the customer what they're actually complaining about. So, in the example of a cold meal, they've come to pay the next day, but they actually want to mention that their meal was cold the night before. It's important that you acknowledge their feelings and that you've followed that process. But if they then start to say, actually, the bedroom wasn't very warm, I'm not very happy about the state of the towels yesterday, and they start to pile, it's important that you give your staff the opportunity as part of the process to say, can I just clarify, which parts are you most unhappy about? Are you most upset about the cold meal? Or would you like me to note down all those complaints so that you can clarify, because sometimes customers will say, well, no, I'm really just bothered about the cold meal actually. So they don't necessarily want to pile on all those complaints, but they felt that they wanted to throw that into the conversation. So you can perhaps make that part of the process. In order to stop escalation of that process, it's important that the customer feels that they can trust the process, and you might like to describe to them at this time what that is. So I'm really sorry that you're feeling so bad about your cold meal, and that you had a cold meal last night. Would you like to come to one side, and I'll just take a few notes in order that I can feed it back to our management, if that is your process. If your member of staff can manage it themselves, that's fine. Please, would you like to speak to a member of the management, or shall I take notes and we will make note of what your complaint is and we will come back to you? If a complaint is a formal complaint where they are keen that the management get to hear about it, then you might also like to make the notes and then promise them a review time. So most businesses would take a week to come back, and they say within a week we will have responded to you. And that gives everybody time, and it gives everybody the opportunity to diffuse the situation at that particular moment, and also to give the members of staff the confidence that that process has been adhered to, and also to provide the customer with some trust that you are going to try and rectify or do something about the situation. And this really is in the case where it's beginning to get heated, negative, and it's face to face. And it's important to do that. In the case of an online review, you can also have a process. And again, this is really useful. As we've already mentioned in the webinar before now, everybody has their roles and responsibilities with regards to where excellence is produced, where it lies, and how it's managed. So it's important that somebody is in charge of negative feedback, that there is one person who gets to deal with that and understands how to manage it and feels confident to do that. So if you have a negative online review, it might also be useful to have a process to look at the review, to sleep on it, to pick back over their particular customer journey, to think if there were any festering points, and then always write a response. It's really important to always offer a response online, because those people who are yet to visit you or to stay with you or to take part in your event, they want to see how you manage it. And as we've already mentioned, how you manage a situation quite often can rectify negative feedback from the off. So always thank them for taking the time to provide you with feedback, and that you always take feedback seriously. Then you might like to acknowledge a feeling. So, and I am sorry we are very sorry that you feel the meal wasn't up to our usual standard. You might like to say something about how you have fed back to staff. So in that case, you might say, we always ask staff to check that everybody's meals are good and that they're happy with their meals. And we will endeavour to reinforce that message to our staff after your experience. And obviously, if the meals were cold and you look back and in all honesty, you know that you were short-staffed that evening and actually the food may well have been not the hottest when it went out, then by all means stick your hand up and apologise. You also need at this point to depersonalise, so you can talk about you as a business. And at that point, I think most people are impressed that you've simply said you're going to take that feedback on board and you're going to learn from it and you're going to move forward. If in the case that it looks like you require or it requires that you give them some compensation for their experience, or you want to offer them a goodwill gesture, if it's an online piece of feedback, the best way to do this is to say, we would like to discuss this further. Please contact us on our email here, rather than playing out the intricacies of your goodwill gesture out on the internet. This will also be useful to help you weed out those complaints which were spurious and insincere, and those complaints where they genuinely want to get some recompense. And then obviously if they email you, you can then perhaps offer them something in return or as a goodwill gesture. It shows the audience that are reading those reviews that you care. It shows the audience that you take note, and it shows the audience that you are willing to provide some recompense. You don't want to say, well, don't worry, we'll offer you a freebie, just email us and we'll give you a voucher, because that shows that you're a pushover, and you might start to invite that kind of pushover approach. You might start to invite customers who want that from the beginning, but being professional, cool, calm and collected is the way to go. If you get negative feedback that is either not connected with your business for any reason, so they've got the wrong Red Lion pub in the wrong part of the country, for example, then please put feedback as well and say, I'm sorry you seem to have had such a bad experience, but I think you're talking about a different Red Lion pub. And if you get a complaint from somebody, and this does happen very occasionally, who has actually never stayed with you or never visited you, again, you can put, I'm sorry you seem to have had a bad experience, but I think you've got the wrong business. If you get very libelous negative feedback, something that is entirely beyond all recognition of their experience, and this is rare, we hear about it in the media because it's rare, but you get somebody who clearly is just out to extort you in any way or defame your business. If you feel you know who it is, then you can report it to the platform. Say this person is reported, and you can also put as your response, thank you for taking the time to respond. We have referred this to, or you can in fact also, you don't want to get into an argument with them on there, but you can also add that this complaint is now being dealt with privately, for example. So you can say to them, if you have a complaint, please email us. Quite often they won't follow that up, and quite often you can then leave the response, we are now dealing with this privately. From a negative reviews point of view, if you imagine something like TripAdvisor, and you have a business, what you want to aim for is lots and lots of fabulous 4 and 5 star reviews, which is great, but all businesses will get 1 or 2 1 stars, and your customers will understand that that is life. They will understand that you are clearly a brilliant business, but every so often you've had a grumpy person, or somebody who's had a bad day, or somebody who's got the wrong end of the stick. To a certain extent, people will accept that if there's 1 or 2 1 stars, however disheartening it is for you. What you don't want to have as a business is lots and lots of 3-star reviews. It shows that you are distinctly average, that you are not best in class. You never really get to the 5-star area, but you never really annoy anybody, and you never really get anybody grumpy. Worst of all, you get people who don't really care. And being in that kind of 3-star zone is what you want to avoid, because it shows you never achieve excellence and nobody really cares about your business. So let's recap, because we've talked a lot about a lot of different elements here. Let's separate it out. If you have a face-to-face complaint at the desk in your business, it's important to have a process to follow, something you have written down in order to give you confidence and to give you surety at that moment of stress and anxiety. Acknowledge feelings, stick to the process, always provide a response. Even if it is, I'm just taking a few notes and I'm just going to go and get the manager. Or if you are the manager, you can take them to one side and say, I'm taking some notes, and try to come to some solution. Don't overly defend or immediately offer freebies. Take a good amount of time to think. You might like, for example, to say, I'm just going away to make a few notes about this. If you'd like a coffee, I'll be back with you in 5 minutes, just to give yourself some deep breaths. Clearly, if things get really grumpy, it's a matter for the police. It isn't okay for people to be aggressive in your situation, even if you have messed up. And stick your hands up when required. If you have messed up, very early on, apologize. If you know that that room was cold, if you know that that meal was substandard, if you know that that member of staff was notoriously a bit rubbish with customer service, then hold your hands up. Don't blame anyone else. Say it's your responsibility and apologize. Depersonalize in your heart. This isn't about you, it's your business. But always, always move on and learn. In the case of negative feedback and a bad review, again, always sleep on it. Stick to a process. So always, always start with acknowledging feelings and thanking them for taking the time to feedback. If you have offered any kind of response, so you have gone back and spoken to staff, or you have taken note of their complaint, or you've taken note of their feedback, and you are now going to look at your procedures and your products, then that's great. It shows the audience that you care and take the time. If you need to say, I'm sorry, you know that there is a problem, then ask them to email you, and you will take that particular negotiation and goodwill gesture to behind the doors. And again, always move on and learn. So really, in conclusion to this last section of the best-in-class reputation, it's important to remember that bad feelings can fester from early on. So give the customer every chance to open up before it ever gets to bad, negative reviews or feedback. Always be asking those open questions throughout their customer journey. How's it going? How are you feeling about this? How was your meal? How was your sleep last night? So that they have the opportunity to say, well, it was a little bit chilly. It was nice, but it was a little bit chilly. And if they're staying the second night, you can then rectify it immediately. And it's never the bad review that necessarily hurts, but the response to it. So never leave bad reviews unanswered or undiscussed, and always move on and learn.